because I found that this lies to me about whether or not we're actually live. But let's say we're probably live now. All right, welcome back. It's Beard Banter, episode 36. I am super stoked today because we're going to get into some really great conversation with Ryan. And Ryan, is that Cloutier or is that am I
Well,
overbeating it to death?
in Canada, it's Cloutier. If you're in America, it's
Cloutier.
Cloutier. And if you're my kindergarten teacher, it's Cloutier.
Okay, and then if you're this weird guy, Matt, you came up with a whole new methodology of approaching it from a very Southern Louisiana approach of Cloutier. Okay, all right, cool. Okay. Anyways, I apologize. So we're here to talk about this concept that you came up with. So I'm not going to bring it up, Ryan. I'm going to let you introduce yourself and let's let people know what we're talking about. Everybody in the audience, please put comments in. I will highlight them. We'll talk about it. We'll have a good time with it. So let's go, Ryan. Why are we here today, buddy?
Matt, first appreciate you having me on, man. This is awesome, and I love the opportunity to have great conversations. And one of the things that you and I were chatting about as we were looking to have today happen is what is one of the big challenges in our industry, and it's still this taxonomy.
Just one, Ryan. Just one challenge.
One of the bigger ones that I think is a root for a lot of the other ones. We don't speak the same language. We live in a world of acronyms and taxonomies and this soup of mystery of what the hell are we talking about? What is threat detection? What does that really mean? And how do we get on the same page with these terms? But more importantly, and really the crux of today's conversation, how do we get in alignment so that when we go to our businesses, when we go to our communities, when we go to our parents, I'm sure a lot of the listeners today play some type of tech support for mom, dad, grandma, grandpa. How do we make this accessible for them? Am I allowed to curse on the show?
Yeah, you're good. This one's marked explicit.
So it's what I call the give a shit factor. How do we cultivate the give a shit factor? A rural farmer today now has a smart tractor that, due to the recent ruling of John Deere, right to repair, now has its code base publicly available.
Yeah.
How do I get that farmer to engage? Because the farmer's thinking about his tractor as a tractor. I'm thinking about it as a computer and an IoT network and food safety and all these other things.
Yep.
How do we do that? And I think we have to attack the marketing. We have to attack the made up buzzwords. We have to take a look in the mirror too. Sometimes being right and being smart isn't helpful to the cause. And how many of us have been frustrated? They're not listening. But have we ever held up a mirror to say, am I saying it in a way that they understand?
Yeah.
Am I making a lot of assumptions? Well, you've used a computer, you should know this. So that's what we're here to talk about is how do we do this? I mean, I'm with you, Jacob.
Jacob.
Right? I don't know about you guys. Have you gotten any questions about the balloons?
Yeah, tons of it, right? Tons
right?
of it. Yeah, so yeah, and then you have, and I think maybe that's part of the problem too. And maybe let's address this real quick as we go into this. Part of the challenge also is we find ourselves in cybersecurity and in technology often actually having to explain to people deep concepts in order to explain the concept, right? If you look at this as saying the balloons, well, it depends, right? One of my favorite statements.
Hmm.
What was hanging from it? What kind of data telemetry could it access? What does that data mean? What's the usage of that data? All of those are barriers to entry of somebody understanding the context of why that balloon matters, that you have to either educate or you have to have trust. And I think that's this interesting place we live in. If you call your attorney, you don't usually ask your attorney to explain to you at $350 an hour all of the legal precedent steps they took to come to that conclusion, right? So you do have a bit of that interesting challenge of needing to get the farmers buy-in because they're not set up to succeed from a technology perspective, in addition to having to explain a very deep body of knowledge that's been nuanced by what basically is marketing crap, right? Like even the term MDR, XDR, I just wrote a whole blog on EDR, XDR, MDR, just to fight through the layers of somebody creating terms that mean something that don't mean anything sometimes, right?
You mean antivirus on steroids?
Yeah. Well, right? They couldn't call it that. That didn't work for marketing, right? We had to call it something new and classified delineation.
Right. Well, and here's where it gets interesting. So let's unpack, because you said a key word for me, and that's context.
Okay.
Now, at Security Studio, so I suppose introduction, Ryan Cloutier, president of Security Studio, longtime fan of security, gray hair practitioner, right? You can Google, if you guys are that curious of who I am, feel free to look me up. Now, having said that, though, one thing that's been true throughout my journey is understanding how to frame the conversation in context. And what I have discovered and what Security Studio requires of any of our security practitioners is an understanding of the business we're trying to secure. Because without understanding the business drivers, the business values, the reasoning behind these seemingly illogical decisions,
Yeah.
right? We can't really put it into context. And
Right.
so we've traditionally relied on FUD, fear, uncertainty, doubt. Well, Chicken Littles, the sky fell, but nobody noticed,
Yeah.
right? So I got a new credit card. Why do I care to protect my credit? I have had 100 data breaches this year, and no one's come to kick my door in. So you
Well,
know,
and even worse, you've now asked a CISO or a board to spend money on
mhm.
something to protect them, knowing it's not the end of all the places that had to be protected. And so when you fail again, it almost kills the cycle of, well, you said you'd protect me last time, you didn't protect me, right? And so you get into that challenge. Alyssa Miller had a great talk on that at
Yeah, well, it's the
Hardware
vendor.
Stack and
Vendor
Press.
didn't tell me this. We were talking right before the show started. One of the things that I always want to understand is total cost of ownership over time. Don't tell me what my license cost is. I want to know what my headcount cost is. I
Yeah.
want to know what my infrastructure cost is. I want to know how many replicates and redundants I need because the cloud service you've promised me is 4 nines, contractually says, 1 9,
Yeah.
right? I want to know who you're doing business with and how dependent you are on your third and fourth and N party,
Yep.
right? Because we just had a deal where a lovely young woman had started a parenting blog. She's been running it for like 12 years, and she built a business around this. And her hosting provider went out of business. They were outsourcing 3 4 layers away. So the person that built the site, the person that had the domain
Mm.
record ownership, you go to the who is, it's a guy that's dead, right? And I don't know if you guys have ever tried to unwind that, but it's
It's a
not
pain.
easy.
It's a lot of
Right.
work. Yeah.
And so she lost her business. As we think about MSPs, which I know are near and dear to your heart, right?
They
MSPs and
are.
MSSPs. Let's remember it isn't just the business a lot of times that they're worried about losing, it's the house that they double mortgage to get the business up and running.
Yeah.
And that's
100%.
why, context is so critical. And
And,
we have
and,
their
And
language.
Jacob hit this nail on the head. And actually, so I will call out my counsel, our corporate counsel at PAX 8. Tyler is amazing at this, right? He does him and his team do a fantastic job of communicating the business value and actions and cause of actions, right? Attorneys have to be good at that. That's kind of the
Mhm.
key. Their profession has gotten there. And they are also a jargon filled risk management cost center, just like security. So I think you're actually probably right, Jacob, in the sense that some of the coping skills that attorneys have already dealt with, we're a bit more of a nascent group than attorneys. Legal counsel's been around for forever in corporate counsel, right? And having a decision tree. Some
Well,
might argue in the legal degree less and more, but
well, let's confront a reality though. They have a couple levers we don't.
right.
Why do I blindly listen to my lawyer? Jail. I don't like jail. I don't want to go to
Yeah.
jail. Okay? I can go to jail for certain things in business if I don't follow the laws, follow the rules, right?
Yeah.
The other is I can have my business taken away from me. I'm
Right.
publicly traded, the SEC can, right? So I have this very tangible consequence that I can very easily understand. But
Sure.
when we come with cyber, we're talking about an ethereal risk, an abstract risk, okay? And in my experience, risk is personal. How you grew up, what you were exposed to. And I've always found it interesting that we get a room full of people together to get on the same page about a risk, but we've never stopped to wonder what their view of risk is. I'll give you a quick analogy. I like to occasionally jump out of an airplane. I think it's a
Okay.
hoot. I do the risk math. I got the safety gear. Yeah, it might not open, but I'm willing to risk it. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Friends that are like, we love you. We are ground crew. Never in a million years am I going to jump out of a perfectly good plane. And that's because we view the risk differently, our risk
Sure.
appetite. Now, your CFO, your CEO, your CISO, your whatever unit of business you are, and the other stakeholders are all looking at the risk differently. And until we get it down to EBITDA, until we can tie it,
Exactly.
until
Yeah.
seriously, because
Yeah. 100%.
there's just too much nuance. So I say all that to say this. As much as you can when you're engaging, drop the acronyms. Start to understand what they care about, not what they're scared of. what they care about. What is their motivator? Is it ego? Is it money? Is it power? Right? And it's going to be different across the table. And I wouldn't do it in a group setting because everybody's going to be worried about being judged. And so they'll
Yeah.
give, but if you can tap into that, you're going to have a 10,000 times more effective and powerful conversation about the risk because you're speaking to their area of care or their circle of care,
Yeah.
and hopefully in a language that they know how to, that's relatable to them.
Well, and you hit this nail on the head, right? If counsel's viewed as being jargon filled, then counsel needs to modify his or her approach. I mean, it's exactly echoing what you just said in the inverse of saying, maybe don't use those. Try to
Mhm.
not do that. I find one effective method is storytelling.
Mhm.
I like to tell stories, and maybe that doesn't always apply at the most sophisticated boardrooms or things like that. But then I just get seen as that old country boy. You know what I mean? And I'm okay with that. So,
Yeah, I think it's human nature, right? So let's break this down. And I don't know, Matt, if you're familiar with a concept I've been kind of playing with: analog human living a digital life. And there's an inherent incompatibility. What if I told you you are a natural born risk assessing machine?
yeah,
You got out of bed this morning, you were assessing risk without even thinking about it. As a matter
I
of fact,
started to put on my hacker hoodie as I walked down the stairs today, and I was like, "Bro, I'm fat and don't bounce well. Let me just pause for a sec, get the hoodie on, then get the hands free to catch the guardrail if something
right?
happens." Right? Like,
Right?
yeah, 100%.
And so in the digital world, we don't see the bear for a bear. Now, tapping into that analog human storytelling is actually incredibly effective. Everybody loves to hear a story. The key to good storytelling is to captivate them in the first 5 to 15 seconds with something that they view as relevant and meaningful. If
Yeah.
you do that, they are glued to the chair through the end. Now, if you suck at storytelling, that's probably not going to be a good tool for
Fair. That's
you.
fair. That's fair.
But
You
I
can
always
get better.
Right.
But
Well,
yeah.
in framing with a narrative, like even if you're not good at storytelling, there's a way to frame a narrative around it.
Right.
We want to, increase we want to reduce our bottom line expenditure. And the best way to do that is to do a proper asset inventory so we can see if we have duplicative assets. We probably have 3 iterations of software all doing the same thing. So it's almost like, I don't know if you're a dog person, cat person, got
I
pets.
got 3 German shepherds. So
Okay,
yeah,
so
dog person,
hello,
pretty
German
kind of
Shepherd
in
guy
charge.
here, and mine has got so much anxiety that we have to give her antacids. Okay, so what do? We put it inside of peanut butter.
Sure.
We got to figure out what the peanut butter is and hide the security inside it because the harsh reality is, while we love this stuff,
Yeah.
we
Well,
love it.
you
You know?
you you said it though correctly, right? It's a focus on EBITDA, right? In a way, or some abstraction from that and how it goes that way. And what I mean by that is like, I beat the story to death. I used it earlier in MSS Denver, and I think David Jones might have been there. So my bad, bro. But Starbucks CISO he gave a talk in Seattle where he was talking about how he got FIDO tokens implemented at the barista level at that extension.
Mhm.
And you and I could sit here and talk about all the benefits of even what is FIDO, right? Which is again acronym soup,
Mhm.
how it functions. But what it really is, and what he sold it to the board of was, if I give them these things and we make this capital investment, they can sign in 32 seconds faster to serve coffee. And that means that every time they step away, every time the screen locks, every time we implement these other things, this is faster. It's 30 seconds faster. It means coffee is in the steeping pot faster than it would have been otherwise, and we make more money as a result. And here's the numbers. And I think the point being is, if you can simplify that down to the narrative of what you're doing, they trust you to understand the other components of it, to have brought well-researched options, to have understood the business's nature. At least they should.
Mhm.
Hopefully, you should have earned that trust, I think, in that statement. But yeah, it's right. Anyways, just triggered me on that thought of, you got to find ways to talk about the peanut butter. The peanut butter is more
So I
coffee.
love it. I love it. My example, K-12. So trying to implement MFA in a union controlled setting, bless your little heart, right?
Right. Fair.
So how
Yeah.
do you do it? How do you do it? Well, I took the approach of reaching out to the teachers union to reduce the liability to their union members.
Yeah.
See, MFA isn't an inconvenience, it's a protection. What the union cared about was, you're trying to force something upon our union members that we don't see the value to our union members.
There's the point, isn't it?
It is. And I didn't have to explain what MFA was. I didn't have to, and obviously didn't tell them that it's not the end all be all. The insurance company has
Yeah.
sold
Let's
you
not get into the. Yeah. We'll just in a
that
separate
aside.
conversation.
If they're doing it, then they have reduced their potential civil liability because, frankly,
100%.
we are getting to a point now, while it hasn't happened much, I absolutely see it coming, where the individual is at risk of civil liability because
Yep.
insurance companies are not going to pay. We're running out of money to pay.
Well, we have to be careful. We have Brad Gross on here, which I'm actually applauding Brad Gross. Anytime I see someone show up as LinkedIn user and I have anonymized information about them, I know that they have done some pretty good security protocols and privacy protocols on it, which is awesome.
I
But
really
Brad Gross being on, I've actually theorized this the last couple of years. I think you'll see some watershed legal cases around civil aspects, especially around this kind of inherent risk that vendors create. And by that, I mean, you have this caveat emptor situation of, well, let the buyer beware. But you also sometimes kind of have proof that you knew better and chose to put them in that position. I'll give you a great example. I was talking to some fictitious company that's massive and worldwide, and I was over on the West Coast very deeply, right? And I was being asked, Matt, why do people not have MFA turned on across the board? Why is it 26%? And my answer back was, why do you not force it on and make them take it off? Oh my God, we could never do that. Great. That will eventually be a documented proof of revenue and profit over the choice to secure someone, knowing
Mhm.
you had the ability to have done so. And maybe I'm summarizing, and maybe one day this is bring Brad on to have this conversation. But I really think they're setting themselves up for that personal liability, and you're also seeing some of this actual criminal liability shift too. Look at the SEC; they
Mhm.
said, "Hey, you might need to have a board representation that's cyber." Why? Well, so you can prove they knew better, right? You can prove they had an education level to make a decision on this, right?
Well,
But
here's where it gets
anyways,
crazy. All right, so let's go down that hole for a second. What if I told you cyber is the only industry in which a consumer product has the ability to cause harm, destruction, injury, and death, and does not come with a warning label to that effect? The hammer I just bought came with a freaking warning label
just don't hit
about
yourself in the head. Yeah,
not
yeah.
hitting myself, wearing. I mean, the thing is the length of the handle, right? Don't do this,
Right.
don't do that. If you
Right.
right, okay, because we know a hammer is a.
But that John Deere tractor, back to your point, doesn't say, and I know some people that have proven this. You might have been part of that, but I know Chris was.
Mhm.
What if maybe your tractor said, "Hey, because of cyber connectivity, this tractor may plant seeds 9 inches deeper than they would ever germinate at, causing entire crop loss across an entirety of your." No, it doesn't have that there, right? It's not forced to be there. To your point, right? It doesn't have any of
How
that
about
conversation.
how about the bed I just bought that you have that uses numbers and it
Sure, let's go that way. Yeah, I got you.
requires
Okay,
Wi-Fi? Okay.
right, right.
What if I said that the firmware is vulnerable to having the pressure sensor modified to not stop the pump? I don't know if
Yeah,
you ever
yeah.
saw the Mad TV episode with the ejector bed. I feel
Yeah,
bad for the
fair.
install guy. He's like, we need to put this on the internet. I'm like, mm-mm.
No, ain't doing it. That's
But
great.
so I say all that to say this. I believe we actually have laws in place today that just need to be a line item added. What about consumer protection? You
Right.
can't, if my toaster had a 90% chance of burning my house down, I
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to buy it. So why does my router that was sold to me today as brand new with firmware on it that's 5 years old, known to be vulnerable, running an OS that's 10 years old, known to be vulnerable, why is that an acceptable practice?
Yeah. 100%.
Right? Informed consent, right? I mean, that's really what we're saying here. Like, fine, I'll buy the car that magically turns left at random intervals because
It's
that's,
only killed 7 pedestrians. We're
I mean,
fine right
you
now at
know,
this stage. Yeah.
but then I better, you got an SUV. You ever pulled down your visor? There's a giant permanent warning sticker about not
Right.
over from taking a corner too fast.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because it's happened. But to your point, I mean, and we'll get back on the other topic here just to make sure we're staying kind of true to it. But I think you're going to start seeing that kind of awareness and understanding across our law space as a result of this. Right.
Yeah,
Like at some point, you'll have to warn people about it, that there's some degree of risk. And when you go back to that toaster conversation, look at IoT or Internet of Things, right? And now that internet connected toaster could also burn down your house because it could be remotely turned on, right? Like in this kind of conversation too.
right. Well, we
Uh,
just had a safety event actually. Just last week, there was a death directly related to IoT.
okay. I didn't hear about that one. So you guys,
I don't know if it's public, but
okay.
I'll give you the high level real quick. a IoT controller was vulnerability scanned, which we know, and if maybe we
Can
don't
be
know.
destructive to certain things if they're not well structured for that. I'm looking
Okay.
at UHP printers. Anyways, I
Oh,
digress.
what was that story, man? What did you do?
I just
So
scanned for vulnerabilities. I don't know. Yeah.
it's vulnerable to fire. That's not on the CVE list. So I think that's an 11. Do we have
It
an
should
11?
be an 11.
Right.
Should be
But
an
I
11.
understand getting at they were trying to do good security, and in the process, because it was not well understood, because the manufacturer of said device had not put out a guidance around that, unfortunately a human had to go reset it, and upon resetting it, it had failed either open or close, whichever way was the wrong way,
Right.
and ultimately did result in loss of life. And I think you're going to see more of those events. I think you're going to see more things happen with hospitals and physical. We're not collecting the data right now to show that the delay to the emergency room because of the ransomware, resulted in this, that, the next
There's a
thing.
lawsuit in Birmingham over that right now about a transfer to physical means that for backup because the ransomware had the system down. They transferred to paper charts and the patient died.
Right. Now, a
So
grieving
yeah.
family has no interest in your acronyms.
Right. Yeah. Let's bring that back to point. See, that's why you're the professional right here, buddy. Right. You just brought us. I mean, look, you just grabbed that rudder and went, let's pull this thing right back in the wheel. Yeah, 100%. Right. The acronyms and the challenges of this language barrier for the understanding. Right. I think the consumer privacy or the consumer protection conversation is definitely a good segue from that. But we often don't have a common language to even address what is good security, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you look at this from a perspective of, let's take the acronyms all into play, but now you have a vendor, and let's say they come out and say they're talking, we do zero trust, right? That's the new buzzword. But before it would have been, we have AI anti-malware. We have, and they're always led by these giant marketing charges. But it's happening in a world where the practitioners are being offended by that. And
Mm-hmm.
and I think you maybe I'm being over summative, but I think you find yourself in that camp, right? And it's because we really want to know, what does it do? We want the actual data. We want to know how this fits in. We want our context into how this ties into what parts of our world on a framework that hasn't even existed. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on, how does a framework change that for us? How does having a core security framework? This is my big passion right now, is CIS and NIST and
Yep.
all of that. But help me understand that.
So as a guy who will be revealing very soon a master map of the frameworks,
You don't say.
I do say over 150 of them, by the way.
It's
Straight
almost prescient that we're having this conversation, my
line
friend.
crosswalk.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because what's universally true? There's two things that are universally true. The first is there's only one way to do security, and that's the right way. Okay, period. There's just you either know what you got, what it's doing, and why, and you've taken appropriate measures, or you haven't. It's that
Yeah.
simple.
And that could be 100 ways that's done, but the
Correct.
right way includes knowing yourself, knowing
Yep.
your risk, and mitigating and or deciding what to do with that risk in a
Exactly.
healthy way, right?
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. And the second is they're really, I don't think we need another framework. What we need to do is boil the language. If as I was going through these frameworks, what I discovered was, yes, I can ask you in 100 different ways if you do asset inventory, but the spirit of every one of those questions boils to a binary yes or no. You're either doing it or you're not. So it,
Yeah.
it could say, well, are assets properly identified, cataloged, organized, tracked, traced, and okay, cool, right? And then somebody else says, my way's better, I'm smarter, I'm going to ask it different, or I'm going to add some nuance
Yeah.
for industry, not realizing, you know, we've covered this. The basics are still the
You're
basics.
going to trigger Jacob Horn here in just a second. I know we're
I'm
going to
not
call
saying
him
that
out of the
frameworks
audience.
have a role. Frameworks
Yeah.
absolutely have a role. The problem is, though, and to something I talked about with you before the show started, I had a lady that I was talking with that was like, I need
Right.
CMMC. Turns out she does nothing that would be in scope for CMMC, and really she needed something more like CSF or CIS or something lighter, right?
Yep.
But because we've kind of drawn this line of compliance as a driver, and compliance and security aren't the same, and that frameworks are the solution. But let's be honest, have you ever tried to directly implement anything in a framework?
Right. Yeah,
No.
it's all about the breadth of it and different silos of it and different things that come into each part of that and different parts of the business unit and all of that aspect of it, right? Like 100%, it's broad
And the
even when you're trying to
practicality,
implement it. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Practicality, right? So if I say to you, Matt, monitor my network, Okay, Ryan, got you. And you'll come back and you'll
Mhm.
give me some metrics. You'll give me some
Yeah,
things you're
yeah.
watching for. I
Yeah, what
tell
did you specifically want me to monitor? What were you asking
risk
for?
to monitor, I'm going to get a different
Yeah,
set. There'll be some
yeah.
overlap, but I guarantee you there's difference.
Were you
And the
wanting hips and nips? Were you wanting, right, hids and nids? Were you wanting, like, what did
turns
you
out
want?
and it turns out what I was really looking for was if Karen had a gambling habit or not, because she's actually my biggest risk right now.
And isn't that a very different approach from a technology and/or perspective, right? And that's that language gap you're talking about, right?
Yes,
Like,
yes. So I
yeah,
think frameworks have a role, but I do think it behooves us to step back for a second and go, while it's interesting to us, is it helpful to talk to my business stakeholder in terms of framework? Or is it more helpful to talk in terms of optimizing business process,
yeah,
increasing revenue, decreasing bottom line, reducing lost time exposure? Think about
yeah,
supply chain. One of the risk factors studios now considering as we're looking at things that's not very well covered in the frameworks is what role does this org play in the overall supply chain? Because if I'm looking at a holistic risk picture, I have to look at what their interruption in the supply chain does to the up and downstream. And if those streams terminate at any critical infrastructure, I've got a whole different rule book I have to play by.
yeah. Yeah, and I think one key point I want to break apart that you said there was, and maybe this is a concept that I just landed on too, is that it's not that the acronyms are broken, even though they are. We'll delve into that maybe a different time. It's
I think,
actually that we shouldn't talk about it in that language in any way. And this goes back to what Brad Gross said. This is back to what you said of our jobs to be a translator to business language from
mhm,
acronyms. Our job isn't to educate about the acronyms,
right,
right? Unless it's necessary for meeting a business objective, unless it's necessary for getting buy-in or something to that
right.
effect. But it's to the point of we should speak in revenue. It was on the show I was on earlier today. One of the guys said, listen, our CEO came in and made us speak in. It was a franchisee type operation, and it took $1.5 million to start a new store. And
Mhm,
so what he said was, you have to come in and tell me your budget based on how many stores we will not open this year.
mhm.
Right? Like that's it. I want to know why you are saying this security need for all this new Cisco gear
Yep,
is worth 2.7 stores not opening. That's the only thing I need to know.
correct.
Right? Like that piece of it. And I'm trivializing some of the thought process and education that has to go into to make that determination. But it's almost abstracting that leadership team and abstracting that side from actually having to know those things where we've done it as the leading buzzword to sell the next thing.
Mhm,
Especially if you take this down to MSP land where MSPs are going, I need Sentinel One or I need to add on an EDR product. I'm going to go talk about how old and broken this is. And that's why this is that. And I'm going to educate and I'm going to drive that need. And really what they need to just say is, this is part of what I do for you. These are the changing landscapes. And in order to continue to be able to provide you that seamless experience, have the ability to respond and reduce the impact of something, I need these tools. And this is what we're going to do. Like we used it as the buzzword instead of educating about the systemic walk we were down. Right.
well,
And that part. Yeah. Go
and I'll give you this. When's the last time the power company showed up to do electrical awareness training at your door?
ahead.
Had a
Fair.
conversation about the number of
Fair.
outlets in your house and what load is on what circuit? Do they expect you to know what transformers in your backyard?
Right.
No, they don't.
Well, you
But
didn't. I don't. Go
I
ahead. Continue.
was just going to say they do teach you don't mix it with water, don't put a fork in the outlet, and if you
Usually.
do,
That's
there's
what happened
dire,
to my eye. Yeah.
right? But it's like, and I think we have to shift to understand that we aren't part of the business. We are the business.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
so integral to every single element and aspect that we are power and water. We are, and what's hard for us as practitioners, nobody values the plumber, right? They just don't. Or I shouldn't say nobody. I'm being overly generalized. Most people
Yeah.
don't
Yeah,
think
there's some
about the
plumbers
plumber.
that might throw things here, bro.
Right, right. And by the way, the in the state of Minnesota where I live, the three nicest houses in the entire state are owned by the porta potty guy, the septic tank guy, and the biggest plumbing company.
Yeah.
They got the
Yeah.
nicest houses, more than the CEOs of the big corporations, right? So it's because it's needed and it's understood that I don't have to be an expert. I let them worry about it and I know the value of it. And that's where
Yeah.
I think our next year and a half to 2.5 years is as an industry is it's time to rally together and say, yep, we are smart, we are right, but we're not as effective as we can be because of that. What do
So
we
you're 100% right. I want to tack on though that in that electrical example, Early days of electricity, you had an electric plant manager, the person that managed your plant's interface with electricity coming in from public or other means, right? That was a whole role. But
Mm-hmm.
once it was always three phase or two phase or one phase, and each phase was 110, and each phase gave you 60 hertz of power with this much amperage, and you could add those three together, and you could, once you got to that stage, then the number of outlets just met a code. And the number of things, those got systematized and became normalized. And I think that's where a framework plays in, is at the MSP level, at this practitioner level, at the using frameworks and adopting them that way are like having 110 defined
Mm-hmm.
and this many hertz and those type of systemic things that are necessary. But additionally, in your plumber example, the reason it's so critical is we want poop to roll downhill. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and we want fresh water to come out of taps into places we can use them in vessels. That's our jam, right? That's our water delivery structure. And the problem is, if you don't do it right, poop doesn't roll downhill. Poop rolls
Correct.
back uphill. And so you have this very evident challenge and problem that's very easy to understand. And so there isn't as much learning or teaching about the problem. And that's why they transferred that to that person. But that person's also licensed. And I think some of the other things that have to happen in our industry that will go a long way towards this trust will
Mm-hmm.
be driving things like what you're seeing happening with CompTIA Trustmark, what you're seeing happening around maybe a self-regulatory model, right? I used to have a Series 7 at one point, and I reported to FINRA, but I had to work at a broker-dealer. Broker-dealer had to hang my tag, and if I wanted to be a business that did my own brokerage, I'd have to be an RIA, a
Mm-hmm.
registered investment advisor, and I'd have to take on some of those functions. Imagine a world where at some point technology and technology delivery has to fall under at least the modicum of my plumber from what it takes to be us. And I don't mean that diminutively. I just think that's one of the biggest barriers to change of this too, is that if everybody can be sucked in by marketing terms, even the practitioners,
Mm-hmm.
then you have a world where the non-normalized base of practitioners aids that problem, in my mind.
Yeah, well, and I think too, to your point about standards, right? Frameworks, right? So, a water pump used in a critical infrastructure water delivery system must meet a stringent set of standards
Yep.
for how the pump functions. What's crazy to me is the firmware that runs it doesn't.
Right. Right.
Right.
No,
So
that's a great call out. Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
why not? It
Yeah.
can't function without the firmware.
Yep.
Right. And it's because the mechanical engineer that designed the pump wasn't an electrical engineer, wasn't a firmware specialist, and sure as hell wasn't a security specialist. And that's the next
Right.
piece I want to touch on. We've got to get friendly with our devs. We need to be the best friend the devs have ever had, because the only way we'll ever get ahead of this is by working with the devs and the business to say, we're not going to delay the product by 5 minutes. What we're going to do is ensure that those 5 minutes have a recoverable cost in the form of this EBITDA in one more store opened, in one less risk factor of having loss of operations. The biggest issue in manufacturing is stopping the production line. And I've
Yeah.
always gotten a yes if I've been able to show how whatever it was could
Yeah. Yeah.
stop the
Yeah.
production line. Then they
Yeah.
just rubber stamps, man. They don't. I don't need to read it. It's approved. Don't even tell me what the number is. The accountants will pay it.
Yeah, I had one of those examples when I was working with someone trying to centralize their drip feed DNC for CNC machines in a 200,000 square foot facility, and they were using flash drives to carry code versions around to drop to their drip feeds. Right, so they were physically carrying code around and dropping it on a machine to cut ahead. And you were able to prove, hey, if you do this and you have this mistake, it stops this production line all the way back, because you're now going to have to come back and recut. You're going to have to scrap this part. You're going to have to take, right, like all of that space. And so and you might not even find it out till you're drilling it the next part space, and you don't have another space for a hole, right, or
Right.
something to that effect. Yeah. So, anyways, yeah, when you tie it back to actual stoppage of those day-to-day dollars and digits, 100%, it's easy to get that, and you can get most budgets approved that are in retrospect of that loss. And to your point on the firmware piece, you're starting to see a shift in OT and this operational technology, stuff that spins stuff and moves stuff, being defined further and further by CISSA. Like 882-Rev3 is now saying basically if that toaster is connected to the internet, it's kind of OT because it can move something in this earth. And
Yeah.
so you get into that real world where that firmware now is a key component to its success or failure. And now maybe it doesn't update, or it can't be updated. It has to be taken out of production, or it has, like, you get into that side of it for sure. And we're getting a little in the weeds, but I love the conversation on it for sure.
Well, and to pull us back up for a second. So last year I was contacted by some group that might do things in regard to security for the nation.
Sure.
The conversation was around the OT controllers and the fight they were
Fair.
having with
Yep.
so basically the argument was, yes, we agree that it's bad, but we don't have any obligation within the regulation to do anything about it. And what I
Right.
helped them to do was to go through the IEEE and IEC standards, and I pointed out where the 0 day that just came out represented a significant enough hazard that actually the existing law required them to have to revisit the risk. And therefore, in revisiting the risk, they were able to bypass all the bureaucracy and red tape, not because we were trying to introduce a new thing, but because we found where the old thing already covered it. Nobody had made the connection
All
yet.
the way back to legal, right? Now you're all the way back to why legal is successful at this. They can show empirically, if you do this, you will not be in business. If you do this, this line of business will cause you this challenge, right? And so it's that's a kind of full circle world, right? Is why did it matter all of a sudden? Because it was something we've already agreed to. Right?
Correct.
It's because we're already in this and we have this business and we're now in
It's for your
trouble, right?
protection.
Yeah.
If you look at what the SEC did with the R8 filing, they didn't make a new filing. They expanded by one bullet point to say, we already make you submit risk to us as
Yep.
part of R8. Now we're going to include your cyber risk as part of that.
Oh, you're talking about last March's proposed regulation change. That is what that is that you're referencing. Okay, great. Thank you for bringing that full circle.
Yeah. Sorry. So the SEC basically said, and back to a point I made earlier, we are every part of every business. We are every part of the supply chain. We are try to live life today. And I've met a few Luddites. They're like, I can live without a computer. I was like,
Okay.
you plan on starting a car made after the 20s?
Do you want to consume milk that was driven by a truck that came from a factory? Like, is any
cows,
of that?
you know?
Yeah.
But and so the reality is you just can't, and therefore if we're that embedded, then the existing structures almost always account for what needs to be done, but it's missing that bullet point that says, oh, and the computer too. Right? We do food safety, but we don't hold the computer that's doing the inspection.
But you know what's funny? Let's think back about food safety. And I love reach back corollaries, right? Like that's one of my favorite contextual anchors in general. But if you look back at food safety instructions and why you have these ingredients lists and these things that exist on that, is because some schmeckle got up with the thing and said, I got these pills that'll fix everything. This is it right here. My name's Carter. Come see this. And eventually they said, no, you can't do that. Like you have to start saying consumer protection wise, what's in this crap?
Well,
And those kind of pieces started with marketing and hype and abuse of buzzwords, in my opinion, right?
oh,
Like in that
absolutely.
way.
I think I actually have, to sidetrack for 2 seconds, I have an affinity for old timey medical stuff. And
Okay.
one of my favorite was a product called Baby Night Night. And it was a sleep medication for the child. It was made of marijuana, opium,
Probably laudanum or something like
oh
that
yeah,
back
no,
then.
it was like
Yeah.
hardcore narcotics. Like, yeah, the
Yeah.
child sleep because it's liquid narcotics,
Why is he drooling so much and is breathing so shallow? This is crazy.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's guaranteed to work. Um, and so I completely agree. And I would argue that the software bill of materials is the ingredients list. And we
Yep.
do need to take that serious, and not to go too far down a road, but I think it's very relevant to the acronym soup. So what's in that third party library you just imported
And who
without?
has control over what gets done to it? Who has we live in this world where, and maybe I'm getting off on too much of a tangent, but we live in this world where trust is established and trust is then thus maintained. Trust is ephemeral, right? Trust is can change at any time. And so when you think about these lists of things, at what point does that trust deteriorate because I now know this has been compromised or this thing, right? Especially when you're talking about that software bill of materials kind of extensibility, right? But
What's the stat? 36%? 36% of code that came out yesterday was released with known exploitable vulnerabilities.
nuts. I'm gonna get Jim Manico in here throwing things at me here in a second, so I got to watch out. But yeah, no, 100%. And I think that the challenge, to bring it back to this acronym challenge, because I want to keep making sure we're focusing on, in this one lens, how does an MSP have conversations with a even less sophisticated than what you deal with, probably from a mid market and up space in a lot of cases. But when you're looking at that SMB, 50 user, 100 user employer, and you're talking to an MSP, how does an MSP have conversations about security without having conversations about these buzzwords, without having, how do they translate? Help me take them through that journey real quick as a kind of a wrap up here.
So the first thing that I always do is tell me what you love about the work you do. Okay, why is this business a business, right? And this is me talking to a stakeholder, usually
Gotcha. Yep.
it's SMB, right? Why do you do it? All right, now what parts about the tech you use to run your business do you just get frustrated by, that you hate, that you don't want to have to worry about anymore, right? And pretty quick we dawn on, I don't have time. I mean, I know I'm supposed to update things, but what does that have to do with making donuts? I want to make donuts. And so by identifying first what their passion is, so I can tie my analogies to that,
Yep. That's smart.
identifying what they view as painful to them, even if I'm like, that's not that big of a deal, right?
Yeah, fair.
Then it allows me to build a value narrative.
Right.
Here's how the products, the services, the support, the care, the compassion, the empathy. Never underestimate the business value of empathy, compassion, care, and kindness. You'll make more with that than you will your product. But having said that, once I can establish that connection point, it becomes very easy to say, well, what if, you got 3 computers here. So for a fair price, what if I said you don't ever have to update your computer again? We'll just handle that for you. Right? Which is way different than coming in and saying, for the low price of $19.95 a month, I'll take care of a problem that you don't fully grasp the value back to your passion. So to say too long didn't read, tie the value back to their passion, and you will never struggle with them understanding it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there is this point of understanding that we still have to guide these small to mid-sized businesses through this journey of understanding that the way they've built their business, they were kind of set up for failure in most cases. Like when we talk about the cybersecurity risk, I would say that it is not new, but it definitely is higher pressure today, especially in the SMB market. Anybody that now has a connected device can be touched. Anybody that has a cloud service can be touched, right? And so you get into this world where it's drastically different than it was 20 years ago. But if you're starting at SMB today and you're using these services, you're being attacked the minute you start touching it. And so how do you deal with it? You have to endemically start with security as the way you work through life. And it goes all the way back to what you said, Ryan. We are part of the business. We are the business, right? We are the absolute fiber of delivery of this technology. When they first got steam engines and they could turn big turnstiles and run 90 sewing machines with it, that was massive because now we could actually do production at a higher level. We could predict that the needle would always have enough strength to go through the fabric. We knew that we could have this many cycles without somebody wearing them foot out. And right, we've got into this world. But at that moment, that wheel became technology and became the business. And if it stopped, the business stopped. And we're doing the same thing with computers. We let the computers and the tech build first and the security second. Those same women in that sewing room, because they had no rules about labor laws, they had no rules about locking the doors, they were chained in until their break and they burned to death when it caught on fire. At some point, we stopped with just the raw tech and added in the other pieces of this world that needed to happen to make it more endemic, right? Like,
And I'll add this as a kind of a closer. Less choice. They don't want choice. They want a prescription. You don't go to your doctor, find out you have cancer, and start to debate the brain.
I would really love this method of treatment, Doc. I think this is the best.
Right. And I'm telling you, I hear it every day from the business owners, whether they're small or big. Biggest enterprises in this country have the same feel, which is, because we give them options. We always go in. And part of it is, yes, it does depend. And yes, I need to ask those questions because I need to understand. But once I've understood, and I think we've all been gun shy to prescribe because we're worried about being wrong. We're worried about losing the account or getting sued. And I think that's the lack of trust on our part and on theirs. But ultimately, less options, more do these things and make it non-negotiable. Like MFA, no one has ever argued about a job saying, if you drink at your desk, we're going to fire you, right? Everybody kind of understands, don't booze hound it up on the job.
Yeah.
When it comes to MFA, we're like, well, I mean, you can if you want to.
Right. We think it would be big. And, and I'm going to hit that point home. When I was an MSP, we wanted to turn on email backup for all of our Office 365 clients. And instead of us going through and trying to meet with all of at that time, like 70 different customers and try to talk about it and suggest it, we sent out an email and said, hey, listen, we're turning this on. It's going to be $3 a person. We're going to start billing you for it next month. Just wanted to let you know you get 30 days free. If you have any questions or don't want to do this, let me talk to you. Be glad to. We had to talk to 3 people. 2 said yes, 1 didn't. But
Yep.
instead of me chasing down 60,
Yep.
like people want to be prescribed to. I would echo that to the moon, man, 100%. Well, listen, brother, we're at the end of our time. I'm super happy to have had you on. I don't think we even scratched the surface of some of the things I wanted to chat with you about, and maybe we'll find other means to get together in the future. But why don't you close us out? Is there anything that you want to leave our audience with on this topic around? I think you pretty well knocked it out of the park, but
Yeah, I would say take a hard look in the mirror. Find a way to connect compassionately with your customer, and no matter how silly their drivers are, find a way to align to their driver and then give them the shortest, fastest, most economical path to the win. And I promise you, you will see your business grow. You will see the risks decrease. Word of mouth will get around really fast that, hey, I work with this group and they took care of me. I'm better off now. My
yep.
premiums are lower, my stress levels are lower, I'm making more donuts. Because at the end of the day, the donut maker, they just want to make great donuts.
Yeah, man. Well, let's go make donuts, brother. I appreciate everything you do in this world. Thanks for
Oh,
coming
right
on my
back at
show.
you, Matt. Thank you so much.